There was a city no army had ever broken. Walls so thick that 2 chariots could race side by side across their top. Homes were built directly into the stone, generations sheltered behind defenses no invader had ever breached. Behind those walls, a nation waited, certain that nothing on earth could reach them. But outside, camped across the river, stood something stranger than any army in history. A people who never charged, never struck, never lifted a weapon. For 6 days they only walked. In complete silence. No battering rams. No siege towers. No war cries. Just footsteps and a command that made no earthly sense. And a people willing to obey it anyway. What were they waiting for? Why would the God who led them out of slavery ask them to defeat an empire without ever raising a sword? On the 7th day everything changed. A trumpet. A shout. And the impossible happened. But the greatest miracle wasn't the walls that fell. It was the faith that refused to give up. If stories of faith inspire you, subscribe to Arkstone Bible and join us as we uncover the most powerful moments in Scripture. Like and share this message so more people can discover God's truth. What if the greatest victory of your life required you to do nothing that looked like winning at all? No sword raised. No wall broken by force. Only footsteps repeated day after day, and a promise you couldn't yet see fulfilled. This is the story of a people asked to trust a plan they didn't understand, a city that stood as the final barrier to everything they had been promised, and a battle that would be won not by strength, but by obedience. Jericho stood at the edge of the promised land like a locked door that refused to open. Its walls were some of the oldest and most formidable known to the ancient world. Its gates had been shut so tightly that, as Scripture tells us, no one went out and no one came in. To Israel, camped just beyond the Jordan, Jericho was more than a city. It was a test. After 40 years of wandering, after burying an entire generation who never saw this moment, this was the first obstacle standing between them and the land promised to their fathers. And it looked utterly unconquerable. Israel had no siege equipment, no experience storming fortified cities. What they carried instead was something far less tangible. The memory of a God who had split a sea, who had rained bread from heaven, who had never once failed to keep his word. Behind those walls, something else was happening that Israel never saw. Fear. Not of an army, but of a reputation that had already crossed the wilderness ahead of them. Joshua stood near the city, likely searching for a strategy, some plan that made sense to a soldier's mind. Instead, he encountered someone else entirely. A mysterious figure stood before him with a sword drawn, identifying himself as the commander of the Lord's army. Joshua fell to the ground in reverence, recognizing he stood in the presence of something far greater than any war council. This was no ordinary battle briefing. It was a reminder, before a single arrow was fired, that the coming victory was never going to belong to human hands. Then came the instructions. Not a battle plan. Something far stranger. March around the city. Once each day. For 6 days. Say nothing at all. No shouting. No war cries. Just silence and footsteps circling a city that had never known defeat. For a people trained for combat, this command must have felt almost absurd. But Joshua did not argue. He obeyed, and that single decision would shape everything that followed. Imagine standing in that crowd, armed, ready for battle, and told instead to walk in silence around the very walls meant to be conquered. Imagine the whispers passing through the ranks, the temptation to question whether this strange plan could possibly succeed. Faith is rarely comfortable in the moment it's required. It asks you to move forward before you understand why. So, in obedience rather than confidence, Israel began to walk. The first day arrived heavy with tension neither side could explain. Priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, the visible sign of God's presence, at the center of the procession. Around it, armed men walked in formation, and yet not a single voice broke the silence. From atop the walls, Jericho watched with growing unease. What did this mean? A strange ritual? A trick meant to lower their guard? No one inside the city could have imagined that this eerie silence was the very beginning of their end. The Israelites completed their circuit and returned to camp as the sun set. No battle. Just footsteps fading into the evening air. And then, the next morning they did it again. Day 2, day 3, Day 4 passed with the same unsettling quiet. No visible change to the towering walls. Surely by now, doubt was creeping through the ranks. How long could a people hold on to faith in a plan that showed no progress at all? Nothing to reward their obedience except the quiet assurance that God had spoken, and that His word had never failed them before. Inside Jericho, confusion may have turned into mockery or a false sense of safety, as day after day passed with nothing resembling a genuine threat. This is the anguish of faith tested by time. Not one dramatic moment of courage, but the quiet, repeated choice to keep trusting when nothing visible seems to be changing at all. It's easy to imagine bold faith in a single heroic instant. It is far harder to sustain that same faith day after day, when the outcome remains hidden. This is where the deepest lessons of obedience are found, not in the shout of final victory, but in the discipline of showing up when belief offers no immediate proof. Israel did not know how walking in circles would ever bring down these walls. They only knew the voice that had led them out of slavery, through the wilderness, and across the Jordan had not failed them yet. That memory may have been the only thing sustaining 6 days of obedience that made no visible sense. Then came the day everything would change. The instructions shifted. Not one circuit but 7. 7 times around the same silent walls that had held their secrets for as long as anyone could remember. The tension in the camp must have been almost unbearable. Everyone sensed today was different. Mothers held their children a little closer that morning. Soldiers checked their weapons, though deep down many must have wondered whether weapons would matter at all. Once around the city walls. Twice. 3 times, the procession continued beneath the rising sun. The heat pressed down. Sweat and silence mingled with anticipation. 4 times. 5 times. 6. Every step now carried the weight of 6 days of obedience, condensed into one relentless morning. No one broke rank. No one spoke a word. The silence itself had become an act of faith. Then, as the 7th circuit began, something new was commanded, something the people had been waiting to hear without realizing it. The priests lifted their trumpets, and for the first time in 7 days, sound shattered the silence that had haunted the walls of Jericho. A single long blast rolled across the plain and struck the ancient stone like a warning no one inside could ignore any longer. Inside Jericho, hearts must have stopped. Whatever mockery had grown over 6 quiet days evaporated in an instant. Then came Joshua's command, the one word the people had carried silently in their hearts through 6 long days of restraint. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And they did. A single unified cry rose from the entire multitude at once. Not a war chant, but raw, unrestrained faith finally released after days of enforced silence. In that instant, the walls that had stood unbroken for generations gave way completely. Stone that had never fallen to any army in history crumbled before a people who had never once lifted a weapon against it. There was no explanation Jericho's defenders could offer. No siege had breached their defenses. The city fell not to force, not to strategy, but to obedience fulfilled at the exact moment God had appointed. Israel entered the fallen city that day, and the impossible had become undeniable reality. But the true miracle was never only the collapsing stone. It was the 6 days that came before it, the days when nothing visibly happened, when obedience was the only weapon Israel ever carried into that battle. Victory did not come because Israel was strong or strategically brilliant. It came because they trusted a plan they could not fully understand, and refused to abandon it before its purpose was revealed. The story of Jericho still speaks across thousands of years, because the questions it raises remain just as urgent today. What happens when God asks for patience instead of immediate action? What happens when the instructions given to us make no earthly sense, yet we are asked to follow them anyway without proof, without guarantee? Jericho reminds us that obedience often looks like waiting. It looks like continuing to trust a promise even when the walls in our own lives show no sign of falling. The battle is rarely won in the single moment of the shout. It is won quietly, in the days of faithfulness that come long before anyone ever hears that shout at all. How many of us have walked our own silent circles, waiting for a wall to fall that seems just as unmovable as the one Israel faced? How many of us have been tempted to stop marching on day 4 or day 5, convinced that nothing was ever going to change? Keep walking. Keep trusting. The 7th day always comes, even when it feels impossibly far away. Perhaps there is a Jericho standing in your own life right now. A wall that seems too tall, too permanent to ever come down. Perhaps you've been walking in silence for far longer than 6 days, wondering if your obedience is making any real difference at all. The story of Jericho whispers a truth worth holding on to. That faith is rarely about seeing the result before you take the step. It is about trusting the one who asked you to walk in the first place. If this story strengthened your faith, remember to subscribe to Arkstone Bible, like this video, and share it with someone who needs this reminder today. Sometimes the greatest walls in our lives don't fall because we are strong. They fall because we choose to trust God.